Hello guys, thanks for joining this session. In this session, we are going to look into functions in PowerShell. So let's look into the topic. What are the topics which we are going to cover in this session? So in this session, we are going to cover what are functions, why to use functions. Then we will look into types of functions in PowerShell. Then we will also learn about how to write documentations for function. Then we will learn about PowerShell functions naming convention. Once we understand that naming convention within PowerShell, then we can proceed further and we will look into ease of use, where we will discuss about some of the helpful commandlet, and then afterwards we will also look into show command for an GUI instance. Here I can demonstrate that whenever you write any function, how we can call it into a graphical user interface. Then we will proceed further and we will look into how we can apply validations on functions. This is really very important topic to write effective and efficient function within PowerShell. Once we understand that, then we will look into what is the problem with PowerShell function and what is the best solution to resolve that problem. Let's jump into PowerShell scripting editor, and where we can understand that what are function and why to use functions. So we are into PowerShell scripting editor, and here now we will understand that what is functions in PowerShell. A function in PowerShell is a grouping of code that has an optional input and output. It's a way of collecting up a bunch of code to perform one or many different times by just calling it instead of duplicating it. So let's understand the function with an example so that you can understand it better. If you remember, in our last session we have used an example of printing values from 1 to 10. We are going to use the same example over here to explain you the function. So let me write the program and then we will discuss further. So we have used num equal to 0 and then we have used while loop. So here we are keeping the while loop again, and if less than equal to 10, and then we will increment the variable over here and now write the out, and let's print it. So it has printed the value. It is printing till 11 because we have used less than equal to. That's fine. So the intention over here is that, so suppose if we want to execute the program till 20 and we want to keep this program as well, so what we need to do, we need to write it again and we need to execute it till 20 times. So see here what is happening, we need to repeat the code again and again. So this is not pretty much efficient. So how do we can resolve this issue? And suppose a scenario in one of your project you want to execute till 30. So again you need to keep the same copy of it and execute it till 30. So there is no harm on it, but this is not a efficient programming. I have taken very simple example over here because I wanted to tell you the concept of function, and the same concept will be applied to any of the complex example or any of the complex functionality. So to resolve this issue, let's do some modification within this program. So let's delete this one, just select this one and delete it, and write a function over here, function, and we are going to give a name which is pretty much standard within PowerShell. We will use a verb and hyphen. For user defined function, I generally use UDF and then the name of the function, that is noun. We call it as UDF number. So what it will do, it will print all the numbers which we will pass in the parameter. So let me write the function over here and then I will explain you. So I have written the function over here. So here we are passing the range and we are iterating till this range, and then it is output those values. So the benefit out of it is that we just need to call this function how many times we want it to print. For example, earlier I have showed you how to print from 1 to 10, and then I have also showed to print from 1 to 20. We have copy pasted the code, but now it is not required to do. So let's use this function now. Let's call it. To call this function we have to write something like this. Now let's run it. If you want to execute till 10 times, then you can call it like this. It has printed till 10. Now if you want to print it for 20 times, you can call the same function. It will print for 20 times, 30 times, and however number of times you want to call it. So see here we have saved with repetition of code. So now you can easily answer what are functions. Codes that can be reused except parameters. So see here it is accepting parameters. It will be executed only when we will call it. So see here we are calling it. In PowerShell we have various commandlets. If you will look over here, so these are all the commandlet specific to the particular modules. So these are nothing but a functions itself within it. And in later part of the course, we will look into modules where we will use functions to design modules of PowerShell. That is really very powerful. Now moving further. So we have understand what are function and why to use function. It helps us to save from duplication of the code. Now moving further, we will look into types of function in PowerShell. So we have basically basic functions and advanced function. So basic function we have already seen in the example which I have shown you. So this example is the basic function, and this is not the right way to write the function within PowerShell. Why it is not right way? Because you can pass any value and function. For example, you can pass over here any string, then this function will fail. So if you will run it, it will fail. See here. So we have to provide validation as well. We have to also provide parameter types as well. So I can show you when we use advanced function. So now let's discuss about advanced function, how it is different from basic function, and let's write a advanced function so that you can understand it better. So let's jump into PowerShell scripting editor now. So now let's convert the basic function into advanced function. So just copy this one so that we can convert it as a advanced function. So what we need to do, we need to specify that something called commandlet binding. So this enable common parameters. So let it write it like commandlet binding, and then we need to specify the parameters. So what parameter we are going to pass over here, and we can remove from here, and let's write the parameter over here, param, and within that we can specify the parameter which we are going to send and the type of the parameter. It is pretty much important. Type we are going to pass is int. So now we have converted a basic function into advanced function with marking this function as an commandlet binding. You can think it of as commandlet bindings are a special attribute classes that we can use to define PowerShell behavior, which actually makes this function as an advanced function with commandlet capabilities. Like currently we are printing the output, but suppose that if we want to use for debugging, and at the time of debugging we can print the verbose messages. Suppose if we pass the verbose flag while calling this function, so it will print that message. So how we can handle that? So here I have used a message write verbose, and it's a simple message I have provided. Without passing the verbose flag, this message will not print. Only this message will be printing. So let's call this function. So let's select this one and load it into the memory. So select and run as selection. Now you will run this, select this one and run it. So we will use it with verbose. If we will run it, then it will print this message as well. So see here we got this message. So this capability give us so much of power to design the function as we want. Whenever a user want to debug the function and what kind of information we want to pass, we can show a special information whichever we wanted to show. I can show you with an example. So let's proceed further to design another example with advanced function. So now let's design an advanced function that will add two numbers. Functionality wise, this function is pretty much simple, but over here we are going to learn so many techniques to design an advanced function. We will learn that how we can document a function. We can also see that how we can pass more than one parameters. Then we can also look into how we can add verbose functionality so that we can provide the information whenever user invoke this function with verbose for debugging. So how we are going to handle that thing, we can look into this example. Verbose output should be formatted with new line and tab. We will look into backtick in this example. In this example, we will cover these topic as well. We will see how to write documentation for function, and we will also discuss about naming convention. I have already been discussed this thing, so I will iterate the same. We are going to use verb and noun combination. We will also look into how to get verbs, the valid verbs or approved verbs within PowerShell. Nouns can be more flexible. However you want to use the name, you can provide that, but verbs we can choose it very specifically. I will show that as well. So let's jump into the PowerShell editor now. So here, to save the time, what I will do, I will write the code and I will explain line by line so that we will don't waste time in writing the code. You can take the copy of the code from the resource section and run it later. Now I have written the function. So within this function, I have done the documentation. Documentation can be done with the help of these things. So where we need to specify the synopsis, description, what this function is doing. And we can also specify the parameters. If we are using any parameters within the function, we can specify those and why we are using it, so that it would be really helpful to the user, whoever is using it. We will also mention that how we are going to use this function, and if we have any nodes, we can specify those nodes. Then afterwards you can specify that commandlet binding, because it is pretty much required whenever we are writing any advanced function. And here we are specifying that whenever this function is being called, we need to pass two parameters over here. And then we have also provided the write verbose. Write verbose is called whenever user is passing a verbose flag. That will be really helpful when the user will do the debugging, and this output will be print every time whenever user call this function. And what it is doing, it is just doing the addition of two numbers. So it is pretty much simple, but the intent of telling all this thing with a simple example, because I want that you can understand that how an advanced function is different from the basic function, and how to do documentation, how we can pass more than one parameter, and how to use verbose functionality. There is something called new line and new tab. Here we have used backtick with n and backtick with t. That is the representation of the new line and the tab. So if you want to do the format, then you can use this thing. So let's run this program so that you can understand it. So just load this program first into the memory, and then we will run one by one whatever the exercises which we have done. So just run it. Now how to check the documentation when user want to see the documentation of this function? So we need to call, there is a commandlet called get commands, and within that we have show command info, and here we need to pass the name of the function. So let's run it. So here you will find that with the help of this get command, show command info, it is providing all the detailed information. What is the name, module name, and the documentation as well. It is printing the documentation as well, whichever the documentation which we have provided over here. So it is really very handy whenever any user want to know what your function is doing, and it will also print all those detail, whichever the detail which we have, how it is being designed. So all this will come over here, and it will also give you the information about the parameter set. So documentation is really very important. Now let's call this function. We will take this and just paste it over here and run it. So let's run it. There is some typo, so let's remove it. Just copy this one and paste it again, and then try to run it. So it has printed 15, and it has also printed thanks for calling, which is coming from this write output. But you see here, it is this write verbose is not printed. Now how do we can print it? Suppose that if anybody want to debug your function, so they can call this verbose, and then on that time it will be printed. So let's run it again with the verbose flag. So if you run it now, then it has printed these information, where it is telling that number 1 is 5 and number 2 is 10. And see here, it has also printed the new line and the tab. So let's proceed further. One thing you must be noticed that how do I come to know that this verb is recommended verb from PowerShell. Noun you can keep anything, you can use anything, but it is a recommendation from Microsoft to use that verb so that it is more informative to the user. How do we can get that? So there is a commandlet called get verb, and if you will run it, then it will give us all the verbs and their purpose. For example, like add, which is belongs to common, clear, close. So you can use anything from here, and what is the purpose of your function, and as per your purpose of your function you can apply over here. So choose anyone whichever you want. Suppose that if you are writing any custom copying paste, then you can use move kind of thing. We have used invoke. If you want to add something, we can use add as well. So this is the way you can get to know that how to choose verb. Now let's proceed further and see the topic. What are the topics remaining? So we have seen the documentation for function. We have also discussed about verb noun format. We have also seen how to get the valid verb, and here now we have also seen some of the helpful command. We have used get command, get verb, get help. So let's look into this commandlet, what actually it does. This will also give us the clue why documentation is really important. So let's jump into PowerShell scripting editor once again, and here we will write get help and the name of the method. Copy and enter. See here how beautiful it is. It has given the information about the functions which we have provided over here, like synopsis, description. So it is telling all those information to the user, or say it is giving all those information about the function which user wants. So it is really very important. So make sure that you will be writing documentation for your function whenever you are writing any production level of function within PowerShell. This will give us a complete information about the functionality of this function. See here, it has also given us some of the information. If we want the complete information, we can use this full flag and run it. See here what it is giving. So it has given us the complete description, what is required value, if any required validation is there or not, what is the parameter position. So all these information it has given. So this is really helpful commandlet. Now moving further, there is other commandlet called show command, which will also use to invoke the function but through GUI. So let's go to the PowerShell scripting editor now. So let's type show command and then the name of the function. Here we will run this one. So this is the GUI, graphical user interface, to invoking that function. You can pass any value, for example 12, 24, and run it. So it has given us the out. So this is one of the way by which you can call the function within PowerShell. Now moving further, so another topic which we are having is how to apply validation on function. It is pretty much very important. Suppose that if you want to apply some validation rule on some parameters of function, so how we can do that? For example, I want to provide a range for parameter 1 so that it will calculate only the value within the range of 1 to 100, and same for number 2. So that means it will do the addition between 1 to 100 only, both the numbers. So how we can do that? So let's look into that. To apply validation, we will use validate range attribute on top of this. So there is an attribute called validate range. So here validate range, and within that we are going to tell that it should be 1 to 100 only. Same for the number 2, second parameter. So this way we can provide the validation. If you pass any value more than 100, then it will throw an error. So let's look into that. Prior to that, let's load this function into memory and run it. Now call this function. So to calling this function, we can use this. This will work perfectly fine. But if suppose if we are going to pass 1 to 105 and 107, so now try to run this one. So it throws an error. Why? Because we have provided the validation on it. This function will work only within the range of 1 to 100. So this is just a dummy example. So the intent of this example is that you can understand that how we can apply validation on function. Now let's proceed further. Now we have seen that how to apply validation on function. So now we will discuss about problem with PowerShell function. So what is the problem with PowerShell function? So let's look into that. So the problem with PowerShell function is it is difficult to maintain large script module. All of the module must be updated for any change, and the source code management. So what it means? So let's understand with an example. Suppose that this is our module. I will discuss the module in later part of the session, but consider that this is a module file and it has two functions. One is show UDF number and another one is invoke UDF add two numbers. And suppose I have done some changes within this function and there might be some bug within this function, and because of that what will happen that it will show the bug within this module, and that will affect the working function as well. So it is really very problematic to maintain the code of separation. And not only that, suppose if your client required another functionality within this module, then again you are coming back to this file and doing the changes, and that changes will increases the chances of introducing the bug within the file. That is really not recommended. So what is the solution for this? So the solution is to keep each module function in a separate script file, and on import have the module dynamically load the script file. And how we can achieve this? That is our discussion point of next session, that is dot sourcing. So we will discuss the dot sourcing in next session. So I am stopping this session over here. I hope you enjoyed this session. See you in the next session. Till then, bye bye, take care.